Dc67, the music band. Soul-touching and life-enhancing stories. The music band. Once, in a beautiful land, there was a super music band. All the musicians in this band were so talented that each musician could play any instrument in the band. They were not proud of this wonderful gift, for all the musicians had the same gift. The musicians of this music band were always together and with happy smiles on their faces, playing the melody of eternal harmony. Notes never stopped playing. The leader of the band didn't see himself as the leader because all his musicians played wonderfully without him telling them what to do and how to play. In their land, there was no difference between day and night, for the celestial sunlight was always shining. As the band was marching between the golden houses on the golden streets, their colorful costumes and golden instruments produced stars and rainbows everywhere. These wonderful melodies they played traveled on sound currents in all directions, everywhere in the universe. Together with the colorful light rays, which came from their costumes and instruments traveling in all directions, the wonderful harmony of sounds which came from playing their love tunes was so powerful that it started to create new planets and stars. The love which came from the hearts of these musicians was so intense that it created life, light, and music everywhere it went. One day the leader of the band said to the musicians, "Listen, through our music and colors millions of other worlds are created. It would be a pity not to go and see how everything looks like. You are free to go on an adventure to see these planets and places and creations and experience and enjoy your visit." Many musicians traveled on their created roads of light and sound in their new universes, created by themselves, their music and their light. It didn't become silent, for the musicians continued to play as they traveled, and also the leader and musicians that stayed behind continued to play the most wonderful, peaceful melodies. So it was, and musicians traveled to various planets and lands and regions and galaxies for a visit. Like in a dream world, feeding themselves through the light and sound, they traveled further and further away from their leader, their homeland, and separating themselves from the other musicians. The farther they traveled away, the more they separated and went their individual ways. And the more the harmony of the band became unclear. The memory of playing and marching together in the golden streets was slowly fading away. And because the musicians didn't like to be without music, each individual started to compose their own songs and melodies. Maybe to forget the sadness of being separated, with which these new worlds couldn't replace. All these musicians started creating their own music, and the longer they stayed away from their original home, separated from the band, the more they lost the gift of playing all instruments. The constant feeding and feeling each of the other musicians in the band was a great loss. They lost confidence and the skill of creating harmony. Everyone chose one instrument and became a specialist. One played the trumpet or piano, another the saxophone, and go on. As they lost the skill of playing all the instruments, they also lost contact with the melody of the band, a band of which they themselves had been members of. They also couldn't travel back anymore, for the road of sound and light currents had become invisible and not audible to them anymore. And now, for this reason, each musician started looking at how they could get a new band together in a place they were visiting, or better said, in which they were lost. It was very strange and sad. They all had forgotten that they had once been with the leader of the band. They all had forgotten that they had played all instruments. Now each individual was trying to get their own band together, a band of specialists. Sometimes a good band was formed, but the sounds and lights were a dim shadow compared to and how they had once performed. Desperately, they all were trying to achieve perfect harmony in their new worlds, and musicians went from band to band, but were never satisfied. The leader of the original band saw his musicians struggling in their chosen destination places, had empathy, and in disguise he too went to these new worlds. What happened now was even stranger. The leader of the band recognized his musicians, but the musicians didn't recognize their leader straight away. However, wherever the leader went, he amazed everyone with his talent, his ability to play all instruments and also to play incredible music. When he played, it was as golden light beams were coming from his entire being. "He is from somewhere else," most musicians stated, after listening to him. One after the other, they stepped up to this wonderful musician and asked if he could teach them, for inside him and his music was the harmony and the melody each musician was looking for. Now it was for him to convince the musicians that they still had the skill to play all the instruments of the world within themselves. The musicians had to work hard, for they had to rediscover and relearn to play all the instruments again. They had to grow. They had to believe in the words of this incredible musician, telling them that they were one and the same as him, who could play all the instruments. It also took time for them to understand that they could travel back to their homeland, but only when they saw the qualities in the leader inside himself and tuned in to the melody of eternal harmony. Slowly, hope and faith returned more and more. With the help of the leader, who always was open to help them to practice, some musicians were able to forget their own limitations. Yes, and one by one they left their specialized fields behind and learned to play all instruments again. One by one they started to play and hear the everlasting music of their homeland again. The leader invited all the musicians who played and heard the melody of eternal harmony to travel back home again, to play once more and forever with their original band, to march in peace with happy smiles in the golden streets of their original home. What the story could bring us. In essence, we know everything. It is our universal and spiritual inheritance. But this knowledge gets scattered and replaced with limited knowledge of the things in the man-created world. It is also we as spiritual beings who are actually all connected as one family, separating ourselves in the experience called life in creation. In this experience, we may want to find the union of our souls again. Once, we were in tune with God's will and music. And now we are out of tune and tuning into other people's tunes or are completely lost in our own tunes.